More on this, let's bring in Gregg Jarrett. He's Fox News legal analyst and author of a new book. I think you wrote two at the same time. I don't know. You have two hands. The book is called The Constitution of the United States and Other Patriotic Documents, about which we'll hear more in a moment. Let's get to, right off the bat, to this decision, or what we assume is a decision not to charge the president with anything, even though somehow he got these documents, these confidential documents, some of which were top secret before he was president. So he wasn't covered at all by the Presidential Act.
Oh, sure. It goes all the way back to his time as a U.S. Senator.
So did he, I'm just curious, will we ever find out if he went from his skiff and stuffed them into his socks the way Sandy Berger did, or what?
No, the rate we're going, it won't happen. And this does smack of a double standard, unequal justice. And that is how the American public will perceive it. You've got two presidents, Trump and Biden, both doing pretty much the same thing, retaining classified documents. One gets charged, the other doesn't. Yes, there are differences between the two cases, but try to explain that to the American voter who's already convinced that Trump is the victim of politically driven prosecution and Joe Biden is the beneficiary of a protection racket run by his Department of Justice and the FBI.
And again, a lot of these local prosecutors, the one down in Atlanta and the one here in New York, one doesn't have high expectations that there'd be much more than a kangaroo trial, considering the fact that the prosecutors went out on a limb saying, we're going to get this guy, Trump, and they didn't even have any charges to begin with. But this was a special prosecutor,
right?
Mr. Hur, who a lot of people expected a little more from, but it looks like he's in the bag.
He worked for Rod Rosenstein, so that told me a lot. Rosenstein tried to drive Trump from office when he was at the Department of Justice. So I had no expectations whatsoever of Robert Hur. He's, I'm going to give Trump a tongue-lashing, sharply critical, harsh letter to follow.
Yeah.
He's taken a page out of the playbook of James Comey, who stood in front of television cameras and readily admitted that Hillary Clinton committed crimes, recklessness and negligence with classified documents. Then he did this magical pirouette in which he said no reasonable prosecutor would ever bring such a case, which was utterly absurd. Now, in the end,
and remember, just for the folks who've forgotten, she took a hammer and bleach to the electronic documents that were in her own personal computers.
People thought she got away with it, and she did. Yeah. They were right. In the end, it hurt her. It's one of the reasons why she lost the presidency. So Joe Biden may escape legally, but politically, I think this is going to damage him.
Okay, well, there are some issues other than how he got the documents in the first place before he was president, how he got them out of the skiff or wherever he first saw them. There is a strong potential that individuals who were either in the Biden household, and I'm speaking specifically of one Hunter Biden, who had all kinds of interests in classified documents relating to Ukraine, relating to China, not to mention the Biden Center itself at the University of Pennsylvania, which Chinese nationals had access to, apparently, and could also, we'll never know whether individuals who were using those documents for criminal means ever had a look at them.
Congress apparently has some evidence that the documents may well relate to the very countries over which Joe Biden was exercising influence, and his son and family members were accepting tens of millions of dollars from those same countries: China, Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan, Romania. Was national security put at risk? Those are some of the questions Congress in the impeachment inquiry wants to get at, but they can't enforce their subpoenas of James Biden and Hunter Biden. Only Joe Biden's Department of Justice can do that, and Merrick Garland will never do it.
So, meanwhile, we have Special Counsel David Weiss, who has spent over 5 years doing not much of anything, with a pretty slam-shut case against Hunter Biden, at least on the gun charge and other things. Now he claims that he's going to be going after Hunter Biden in California. Do you have any expectations or hopes that he's going to do anything other than what he did for the previous 5 years?
No, zero. I mean, this is the guy who tore up an agreement to file 6 serious charges against Hunter Biden. He concocted the sweetheart deal to give him immunity and no jail time. It imploded, and he was forced by a federal judge to bring the gun charge. And I think Congress has uncovered so much incriminating evidence, they've forced him to convene this grand jury. But I suspect it's a charade because it's secret. And if a prosecutor like Weiss wants to present a lackluster, apathetic case with feeble evidence and either not make a recommendation to the grand jury on indictment or to argue against an indictment, he can do that. So this strikes me as a farce, window dressing. I hope I'm wrong. We'll wait and see.
So you have prosecutors ignoring real crimes and other prosecutors, for the same political reason, making up crimes that don't relate, like a fraud charge in New York against former President Trump, in which there were no victims whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's an extraordinary. It's not only two-tiered in one; it's two-tiered in both directions.
Right, and you know, in my book, I've got the writings of John Adams among 65 other patriotic documents. John Adams could see the future. He was prescient. He warned about this very thing about unscrupulous men in power in our nascent government. If left unchecked, would become, in his words, ravenous beasts of prey that would undermine our freedoms and democracy. He was right. We've seen that with the Department of Justice, the FBI, intelligence agencies, unelected bureaucrats weaponizing their authority to go after people, the Russia hoax, for purely political reasons.
And, you know, Law and Order, we used to have a show called Law and Order on TV. I loved it when it first started with Chris Noth and Jerry Orbach. It was very simple. You started, first of all, with a crime, a specific crime. Then the detectives and the cops would work together with the DAs. They'd work in joint action against the perpetrator of that crime, gathering evidence as much as they could, going back to the crime scene. Now, you don't even need to have a crime to begin with. I mean, that's the absurdity of all this. Just getting back to the original case, is it clear that the Presidential Records Act protects President Trump from taking the documents that he had at Mar-a-Lago?
I think it's a valid argument to be made when you read the Presidential Records Act. It is a civil statute that is the exclusive remedy for the handling of presidential records. And, you know, the Department of Justice spent a decade arguing, indeed in federal court, that a former president can keep whatever he wants, including classified documents. They took that position in the Bill Clinton classified doc case. Suddenly, they changed course and reversed it. Why? Because it wasn't Bill Clinton, it was Donald Trump, and they tried to criminalize what is inherently a civil statute.
The danger of this, of course, it's not just about our legal system there's a danger of, because it could happen to anybody, this new form of prosecution that's going on, very politicized. But it also affects the economy. I used to cover Latin America. Every economist I went to, when I said, what's the problem with Chile? What's the problem with Mexico? Why can't you get yourself? Because we don't have rule of law. We don't have blind justice. Without blind justice, without protection for property rights, et cetera, you lose the whole ball game. The economy's finished. Everybody is at the mercy of political favors of those in government.
Equal justice under law is engraved on the pediment of the U.S. Supreme Court. It is an ideal that has been forgotten and abused.
And the details of that are in this book, which I call the Catechism of the United States.
Thank you very much.
This has not only the documents, but also the great sayings of the patriots, speeches, et cetera, that add to those elements that used to be the cornerstones of our legal system.
It is a tribute to the many patriots who made America this luminous beacon of liberty, prosperity, and justice, the envy of the world. You will see 65 of the most important patriotic documents, galvanizing ideas, inspiring words that shaped America. And buy two and give one to your children's teacher or an educator near you.
Lord knows.
Because
that's
our
where it's needed
education
most.
system doesn't teach this anymore.
Gregg Jarrett, thank you very much for being here. Pick up Gregg's new book. It's called The Constitution of the United States and Other Patriotic Documents. It's something you want to have with you very often these days as we're having this crisis that we're in the middle of. Thank you,
Thanks
Gregg.
so much.